as much as I'm not trying to play the victim role, I am 45 and I don't know that I've ever experienced the true love of a man in a romantic state. Sometimes I think that I personally settled for whatever it was because I didn't know that if there was anything better. I dealt with low self-esteem and self-hatred, whether it was who I was at the core, what I looked like, I wasn't this enough or that enough, tall enough, short enough, light enough, dark enough, pretty enough, ugly. So rejection would trigger me really hard to be in a darker place. I can even remember one relationship where the guy cheated and I caught him. And I think I was trying to be faithful to this one. And I said, okay, well, we're breaking up, but we can still sleep together. But I'm going to do what I want to do. And I could be just cold with it. And I look over and he stuck his hand in my car, grabbed me by my hair, yanked my head back and looked me in my eyes and said, "You think I'm playing?" He's like, "I'm coming for you." So I had to immediately begin to repent. And I feel God on that too, to repent from taking God's position in designing my life, my look, and my very countenance to accommodate not only what I thought I was, but what other people thought I was.
Hello there. Welcome back to the Man Fast podcast. Wow. Like, I am so excited. We've been just going strong, and I'm really excited that you are here with me for another episode. Listen, I got to ask you, can you please like, share, comment, and subscribe? I love all of the comments I've been getting. I love all of the inboxes I've been getting. And I'll tell you, all I ever wanted to do was to just empower all of you to just let God heal you from the inside out. And so I'm so excited that this is happening. Listen, I'm excited about my guest. We have been trying to connect for weeks so that she could be on my show. Her name is Sarah Grace. I'm so excited that she's here. Listen, first of all, she is a television producer. Okay. She's all the things. She's a preacher. She's an author. She teaches. She's a graphic designer. She's a publisher. Listen, she does all the things. So she's actually like one of my boss sheroes that I just love having in my life. And so I'm so excited to introduce to you, Sarah Grace. How you doing, Sarah Grace?
Things right back at you. I'm so honored to be on your platform. I've been watching you for so many years, and I'm so grateful to have rubbed elbows in person at a conference. And finally, we're connecting in your virtual studio. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So I think we actually connected in 2018 at a conference that you were speaking at. I was just supposed to just be there. And I ended up like at the last minute being asked to speak or what have you. But this is what's funny. I don't even know if you remember. I remember I was sitting at the table and I heard you, and you're so Baltimore, right? So like, I heard Sarah Grace be like, "Listen, growing up, I always thought I was white." And I'm sitting here going, "What's wrong with this woman?" Like, and I turned to you and I was like, "You really thought you were white?" Like, and you were like, "Yeah, that's how I grew up. That's what I thought." I was like, "I definitely thought that you were Hispanic or Italian or something." So that's how we met in person for the first time. Do you remember that at all?
It sounds like me. I don't know if I remember the exact conversation, but it must have been around the time I discovered my DNA. I literally did the test. And after I started digging through, I said, well, everything makes sense now. I'm like 6 different ethnicities. So that is so funny. But yeah, it sounds like a conversation I would have.
Listen, yeah, it was because I was just kind of sitting there, and then I just hear this voice, because Sarah doesn't sound like what she looks like. Okay. Like we all know, And so I just thought I'm like, who is this black lady talking about? And so first I was just like, you really thought that, so anyway, it was so cool. I've just always loved you. And it was so exciting to meet you in person. I was a huge admirer of yours before I ever met you in person, because you had been on some others platforms. You'd been in like their magazines and just different things. And so I'd been designing with your face on flyers for like a year before I ever met you. Yeah, you would be, people would hire me to do their flyers for conferences that you were speaking at. And I was like, who is this woman? So I knew your face for a long time before I'd ever met you. And so it was so cool to be able to just meet you in person. And I'll tell you, we have been through some things together since that time. I love how God will allow you to be friends with people, even if you don't see them all the time. Like we've been through business matters, heart matters, Mom matters, all the things.
All the things. Right.
All the things. And I just love you for never being judgmental. You've just always been a true sister. And I appreciate that. Yeah.
All of these sentiments are shared. Absolutely.
Yeah. So speaking of mompreneur life, what was life like before you jumped on here with me?
Like today?
Yeah.
Well, listen, I'm about to say I only have 4 kids living at home right now.
Oh, wow. Okay. That sounds like a lot, but that's a little bit with what you used to have.
Yeah, so there used to be 7. Tonight, or today, I should say. I don't even know if it's day or night, so that lets you already know where I'm coming from. Today was kind of quiet. You know, you got 1 at a lock-in. I think 1's at the gym. They're older now. They're growing up on me. All I have is teenagers. I look at them often and say, I have no babies. I have no babies anymore. But, you know, it's a quiet morning here in the deep woods of Alabama where I'm living at this time. But mompreneur life has been something else. And just imagine when I first started my first business officially, I had 7 children from 12 to 1 year old. And what that was like was chaos. So now it's much more peaceful. But we thank God for each and every year of that journey.
Girl, yeah, 7 kids. And I remember you've actually been in full-time business and ministry for a long time. How does that happen with 7 kids?
I don't know if I had a choice of any other way. So I was married. My first child brought me to the Lord, and I thank God. My firstborn, Darius, who is now almost 25 years old, he brought me to the Lord, and his father and I got married and had 6 more kids. And unfortunately, after about 11 years, almost made it to our 12th anniversary, we ended the marriage, and I was thrown into being a full-time single mom of 7 who had been a housewife. I was a very happy housewife for all those years. I did not work a regular job. My husband, when I was married, he wanted to take care of me. He wanted me to be at home with the children. And with as many children we had, y'all, listen, just practicality, putting them all in child care.
The daycare bill would have been a house payment.
It would have been crazy. So when I got divorced, I said, God, how are we going to do this? I haven't worked a traditional job in years, did not have a finished degree of any kind. And I had been in ministry. I had been pastoring, and I had to come out of that in order to survive all of the pressure of the divorce. And so I promise you, it took some serious prayer and just crying out to God to ask him, how are we going to do this practical thing? And God had blessed me with a gift of design. And so I had been doing design for free for 10 years as a hobby, really as something just to try to be a blessing to churches. So the Lord said, Sarah, you're going to use that graphic design to take care of that family. And so by faith, I went to social media and started promoting myself as a professional graphic designer, even though I'd never sold a penny worth in the first 10 years of my design experience. And by the grace of God, it started and it's continued now for almost 13 years. God has used that as one of my streams of income. That's not my only business, but it was the first business. And it was really a miracle. And with that said, I went to school for hair and I never had formal training as a graphic designer. But when I went to church back in 2000, over near Security Square Mall in Greater Baltimore, Maryland, I was at a little storefront church and they needed volunteers. And I said, well, how can I volunteer? And they needed a graphic artist. And I said, well, I don't know how to type, but I have a computer at home. And I went home and I prayed over my hands. I gave God my hands and said, if you'll teach me how to serve this church in graphic design, I will help them, never knowing that he would use this to help me take care of my family all these years later.
God uses everything.
Doesn't he?
He, like, you know, nothing lacking, nothing broken, nothing missing. Like, God really uses everything. And that's amazing to me. So for other people that are in entrepreneurship, you know, I went full time in 2020. I felt like I was kind of forced to do it, but I was also just sick of working for other people who had the power to tell me whether or not I was worthy to receive a paycheck. What do you tell them during those hard times where the money's not coming in like it should, and you're wondering, should I go back to work? What should I do? What do you tell people in those spaces?
Cry, get it all out, take a good nap, and then get back up and rededicate yourself. No, but seriously, I think you have to know that you're called to it. Now, with me, with the 7 children, the reality was I didn't really see another option because they were from 12 down to 1 and going to work, putting them all in daycares by myself and having to go across. If there was an emergency, I would have had to go all these different places. And God still was using me in ministry. So I needed to be able to be flexible. So I knew that I knew that I knew that I had to do it. So for those that are trying to be full-time, pursuing full-time entrepreneurship, you got to know that it's really the call of God on your life, because it's not for everyone to jump right into it. I was thrown into it, and there have been times that I myself wanted to just pack up all the laptops and the media equipment and shut down the social media accounts and go work anywhere so that I could have a consistent paycheck. But what I've done in those moments for myself is I will go back to God and I will talk to God about where I'm at and ask him to give me the grace, the supernatural power, ability to not only do what he called me to do, but to see things from his perspective and to really get that validation again, that this is his will, and to watch where I may have misplaced my dependence. So if I misplace my dependence on my work, I feel a little preachy, Dr. Tamika. I feel
Go in.
I have sometimes put my dependence on my skills or ability, and I had to remind myself that God was my provider. Even though he gave me a skill, he gave me a gift, he gave me the ability to create graphics and websites and so on and so forth, I had to remember that he was the provider. And many times throughout all of these years, I have gotten to a place where I was like, God, it's tight over here, what's going on? But when I go back to him, cry out to him, am honest with him, and then also remind myself his grace is sufficient, not my skill set, not my strategizing, not my striving and working myself to get no rest, but really faith is trusting in his ability to operate through me. So yeah, you got to know God called you, and then you got to depend on him consistently while he's using you in that entrepreneurial space.
It's so interesting because, we're here on the Man Fast podcast because of the fact that God put me on a man fast for a year. And during all of last year, it's like God had me in training, not just, I felt like I had to learn to depend on God, even financially. He put me in a totally different space financially where I had to depend on him in the business. But I've come to now understand he was teaching me what it's like, that I needed to depend on him, like he, almost as if he was my husband.
Yes.
Right. For everything. I needed to depend on God for the fulfillment, to love myself and all those things, but to understand he really was going to provide everything, even when it came to my heart matters. In this space, you wrote a book called The Woman with the Issue of Love. Listen, I have always been struck by this title.
Yeah.
Why did you write the book?
Well, for those that grew up in church or church attendees, you probably hear some familiar vocabulary minus one word. There is a biblical passage that talks about the woman with the issue of blood. Now, this was a woman who was bleeding for years and years, went to all these different doctors looking for healing, and she found her healing when she finally chased after the right one, which was Jesus, and she put her hand on his garment. She was healed. So I'll let you go study that later. But for me, there came a time in my life through multiple heartbreaks, back-to-back emotional traumas, that I had to recognize I was bleeding in a different way. My heart was bleeding. My heart was constantly broken. And we're not even talking about just my marriage, my divorce. I had to really go back and look that this has been an issue my whole life. And then I'd spent years chasing after healing in men. And God showed me that my healing was only going to come through Jesus, and that there was not a person on this earth, not a father figure, not a husband, not a boo, babe, boyfriend, situation, anything of that nature that could heal me and give me what I needed. I had to find it in Christ. So the book was birthed out of my own personal journey. And I had to start back. Really, I tell the story often starting back at 12 years old with my first sexual encounters and relationships. But the truth is, my story really starts at 6 with my first sexual violation. And in going through that, I don't even remember if I shared that in the book, but I do have another book I shared in. And going through that, it awakens parts of you that were never meant to be awakened. And it creates cycles in our lives if we don't know how to debrief and heal from those things. So that book was my journey. And then I wrote it over 10 years ago and updated it a little about a year ago. And I'm still in my journey, but I know where the healing is.
Matters of the heart have always been an issue for me.
Mhm.
And so in reading your journey, I was like, man, this is so me. And we kind of talked about this with each other's book, where it's like, I see myself in your book. I see myself in your book. Um, I was molested at the age of 5, and you're right, it awakens things. It skews your what your perception is of what love is, of what it feels like, what the right attention should be. It shifts everything for you. And so I loved the title, The Woman with the Issue of Love, because I've always had that, I felt, until the Lord was like, listen, let me just set you apart. But I had to choose to be set apart. In the introduction, I felt like you snatched our edges back. And I want to just read a little bit of it, because I didn't even tell you this, or else I would have had you read it. So you say this in the introduction. You wrote, from the rich and famous to the woman struggling to pay her bills, some women are so desperate for companionship that they will accept anything they can get.
Mhm.
Some women tolerate infidelity and emotional and physical abuse in the name of love because they fear loss and being alone. Some women allow themselves to become entangled in adulterous affairs with married men because they don't feel that they deserve or can have their own husbands. Others are willing to share a man with multiple women, regardless of the cost to their soul. Some women allow themselves to become entangled. Oh, and I put that in there twice. Sorry. So I want to ask you, why are we willing to do that?
I don't know if we think that there's an alternative sometimes.
Hmm.
And, as we've shared, we've had these traumas. And as much as I'm not trying to play the victim role, I am 45 and I don't know that I've ever experienced the true love of a man in a romantic state. I do believe there's some spiritual fathers, brothers, friends that have loved me in a godly agape love, churchy way. But I've never experienced that. And sometimes I think that I personally settled for whatever it was because I didn't know that if there was anything better. Now, I
Hmm.
do believe by revelation of God and by being able to witness it in some other people's lives that have really given themselves to the process and doing the work so that they could have healthy marriages. I've seen that this is possible. So I think that we sometimes don't believe it's possible. I also think that our own issues with low self esteem and self hatred are part of that too, because we think it's not that it's not possible for someone, but I may not believe it's possible for me. And so I dealt with low self esteem and self hatred, whether it was who I was at the core, what I looked like, I wasn't this enough or that enough, tall enough, short enough, light enough, dark enough, pretty enough, ugly enough, whatever it was enough, that it was like I have to settle for certain
Uh-oh.
kinds of treatment. And honestly, it was exacerbated by some of the abusive relationships I got into, even starting at the age of 14. I was in my first abusive relationship where that was reiterated that you are not enough and you don't deserve to be loved. And I'm kind of doing you a favor by even being in this space with you.
And okay, so here you are, you're 45. What would you say to the 14-year-old about that revelation? Because when you're 14, you don't realize that that's what's happening. But here you are, you're 45, you've lived life, you've allowed God to process you. What would you say to her?
Whew, I would have a long conversation with her. But a few of the first and most foremost points that I think would be the most life changing would be, Sarah Grace, you are not your experiences. You were molested, but you don't have to be ashamed and take that as your identity. You might
Mhm.
have been rejected by friends, by family, but that doesn't mean you're not valuable. You might have experienced poverty, but that doesn't mean that you are poor and not worth love. You might have I experienced chronic illness and I felt like I was an anomaly and maybe I just was born broken and there were things wrong with me. Sarah, you're not your illness. So I would very much work to convince my 14-year-old self that my experiences and my traumas were not my identity and that my value came from God. And if I could have had a glimpse at who I became, who I was to
Uh-oh.
become, later in life. And listen, like Paul said, not that I have already obtained, but when I tell you I've seen God do miracles, signs, and wonders in my life and my heart and my identity. If I could have given that Sarah Grace, known by many other nicknames, most definitely wasn't proud of her nor her real name, who I was to become, I would have tried to convince her that she deserved so much better because of who she was, and she didn't have to settle.
So you talked about taking on the emotional trauma, the rejection as an identity. That's you now at 45, understanding that's what you did. For the woman that's out there, how do we recognize that we've taken on something as our identity and not just, okay, this is something that happened to me? How can we tell that it's become our identity?
Wow. Well, I think in part, a relationship with God is so absolutely imperative because the Spirit of God can show you things about yourself that you are not aware of. And during some of my most challenging moments with heartbreak, I got to the point where I was no longer looking at who broke my heart in my own eyes, but what was in me that was attracting me to these situations and circumstances. And the Lord, by revelation, helped me to see I had taken on an identity from my experiences.
Oh.
And now, we talked about this in the virtual green room. I went through a make under some
Yes.
years ago. And one of the greatest aha moments of identity I had was during that make under. So I was probably by my best effort to describe it, maybe more flamboyant, more, I've been through a lot of phases, but I was very decorated. We'll say it like that. And I like to have big, bold everything. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I also had really kind of went back into a like 2000, no, not 2000, 1990 something version. Like I went through some kind of, I don't know what you want to call it.
The ponytails and everything.
Yeah, the 25-inch ponytail and the earrings that were as big as my head and all that. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you dress like that and you're watching this is no shade to you. But God started working on me, and he told me one day that I was about to miss the nations for my love of the neighborhood. And I said, what? And it's God when you couldn't even figure out where that thought or idea or concept came from. And he began to explain to me that I had taken on the identity of my experiences and that I was so used to seeing myself in the light of being what I call a Baltimore girl, that I had limited myself by that identity. He also told me that I thought that I was real and authentic. And I didn't even know what authenticity was. And he said, you think you're real and authentic because you're owning the version of you that culture created, that experience created, that the world created. And Sarah, even in some ways that the church created. He said, but real authenticity is when you get the blueprint I had for you when I created you and you become that. So I had to immediately begin to repent. And I feel God on that too, to repent from taking God's position in designing my life, my look, and my very countenance to accommodate not only what I thought I was, but what other people thought I was. I had people that meant well and said, oh, that's just how you are, girl. You just hood. That's just how you are. You always going to be like that. Don't even try to be anything else. And you know what? The way I still have an accent. I still have, a lot of different things about my personality that God is not going to rub out or change. But he wanted me to understand that I had to pursue him. And he started telling me to make different changes. I don't think there's anything wrong with the look, the color of hair, whatever the case may be I had, but it wasn't what he designed for me. I have 3 daughters and they've all changed their hair color. They're always trying. I want straight. I want curly. I want black. I want red. I want blonde. And I love the version of them that was born with no assistance and no change. And they're all just, we're very multicultural family. And they all came with different skin tones, hair colors, very specific, but they always wanted somebody else's. And that was kind of how I was. I don't want blonde hair. I want black hair. I think black hair is more beautiful. And God's like, but I gave you blonde hair. Well, I don't want this, and I want that. I want this. I don't want to talk like this, God. I want to be able to sound more proper and all that. So God retained a lot of the flavor that he gave me, but he helped me to see myself different. And he started telling me, don't wear this, take this off. And he would explain to me, some of these things that you put on your body are your way of tagging or identifying yourself with your history. You want people to know that you came from this and you came from that, so that when they approach you, they only have expectations related to your experience. And then he began to show me, I want to give you a totally different look. I want to teach you how to sit at tables with people you never imagined that you would be at, so that it goes the opposite direction, where they look at your now and they can't believe your history. And so you can't keep wearing your history because there's no testimony with that. So for me, it was really God doing an inside work with an outside illustration. And what's so interesting is, as I started to walk that out, I really haven't changed at the core of who I was. I've always been a book nerd. I've always been a theology nerd since I got born again. I've always loved certain things, but I didn't really feel comfortable communicating about some of those things because it didn't really fit the persona. And so God really just started taking off the labels and the filters and the, just all the layers of things that I had placed on myself or other people had placed on me to reveal my truest identity. And it might not look or sound or feel like anybody. I'm never going to be all the way this or all the way that, or, you can't put me in the box of being a intellectual, because I'm very spiritual. And you can't say that I'm bougie, but I still got a little.
You're a little bougie. You're a little bougie.
Yeah, a little hood still. I got a little bit of, I can't be one or the other. I am all of those things. I am diverse. And so God was teaching me basically that my outward appearance was a sign of my identity. So to take it all the way home, I had to start looking at that in every way. Why did I, now, Dr. Tamika, why did I wear this hairstyle or that makeup? Some of that, it wasn't the streets, it was that man. Well, I saw that he liked black hair, so I wore black hair. I saw that he liked long hair, or I saw that he liked short hair. And God even had to start showing me some of the things that you've done thinking that you would be beautiful enough when you looked like this, that, and whatever. And I went through a phase where I barely wore any makeup. I cut my hair. You probably remember I cut my hair all the way to my chin. And people loved that look on me, but it was me shedding all the things that I was hiding under so that God could reveal who I really was outside of what I looked like. And he took me on that journey of questioning everything. Why do I do what I do? And who am I doing it for? And in that space of sensitivity, I'm able to really see how all those things were connected, even down to what I would wear could have been because of something I went through.
It's amazing because I do remember it was like 2020 that you went through this make under, because you were open about it. Like you would post, and I remember being like thinking to myself, what is Sarah going through right now that she's like doing this whole make under? Like, what is she doing? Because I was used to like the bright lipstick and the big hair. Because listen, like I'm all for it. But it's amazing when I think about it. The Lord did the same thing to me, and I believe that it started happening around 2020.
Wow.
Before that, it really was. When I really think about it, I really began to shift the way I dress. And the Lord would say to me, don't wear that.
Right.
So now when I go on and then the Lord had me just completely purge my closet. And I purged my closet from things I had purchased because I was trying to get attention, purchased because somebody liked it, things that were purchased for me. I mean, I went down to like having hardly anything in my closet. And because the Lord wanted to shed those things from me. And then I also learned, like, Tamika, why did you wear this? You wore this because you wanted people to see your body. I had gone through this stage of wearing really low cut things, and it just was, and I was okay with it at the time. And then now I look at myself and I'm like, girl, honey, you were going through something, but it was to get attention. And then I got to the place where I didn't want that type of attention, And like you said, I'm telling you, I would go in the closet and the Lord would say, wear this today. Even down to now, when I go and preach somewhere, I'll say, God, what should I wear? Right. And I'll go to reach for something. He'll say, no, don't wear that. And I don't know why. And then I get there and the Lord tells me to get on my knees on the floor. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Because if I would have had on that dress, that would have been a problem, And so when we make him Lord over everything in our life, it's amazing, honestly, how easy life kind of becomes. Yeah. You said that when you were going through this process, the Lord was having you take off who you were, and so that you could learn who you actually are. Who are you today?
Woo, I am more amazing than I could have ever imagined. And that is not because of any good thing in me, but God, I like to say God made me a special agent for his ministry. And what I mean by that is where I used to see all these challenges and traumas and things I went through as uh, a kind of dent on my record. It was training so that I could operate in a way that many ministers in the traditional sense cannot. I know how to see into the life of someone that is going through some of the things that I went through. I know how to go in and really have a conversation to help, get that person out of a place of whether it's suicidal ideation, promiscuity, depression, fear, wanting to give up and quit ministry, refusing to step forward, limiting beliefs. I started looking at every experience that I had was to make me into the person I'm called to be. And it's amazing because I'm a poster child for God's grace. And God's grace, we confuse it with mercy a lot. We think that mercy is grace is God forgiving us. Now, mercy is an act of grace, but mercy is when God doesn't give us what we do deserve, and grace is when he gives us what we don't deserve. And we don't deserve the power and favor and enablement of God to live, breathe, and be connected to God and to do the things he's called us to do. But I get to tell people, you know what? It's not by human might or human power, but by the Spirit of God, that God could take a girl that almost died multiple times between 2 and 6 and was molested multiple times in multiple scenarios between like 6 and 8 and I've been through so many different things. I was even, Dr. Hall, I was a cutter when I was a teenager. I used to take razors and cut my arms and my legs. I would write profanity in my body. Like, people have no idea how the Lord has delivered me. And it's amazing to be able to tell a person, yeah, I'm still in process at 45, 25 years into my walk with Christ. God is still working through me to get to even, when you clean your house, I'm looking around, you got to go up in the corners. Yeah, the walls might look good, but God is going in the corners of my life. Like, every negative thought, every low self-esteem thought, any diversion from knowing who you are, whose you are, what I've created you to do, it's got to go. But I've made it so far in that process that I can help other people. I might not have every corner, but honey, I got that wall clean, so I can show other people. So I don't know if I could really give a clear definition of who I am, except to say what Paul said, 1 Corinthians 14, I believe it is, I am what I am by the grace of God. I am a poster child for grace because God has taken my life to show people it's not how you start, it's how you choose to finish. God can take you from being sick to being a healer, from being heartbroken to being a counselor to the heartbroken, from being hateful to being a lover of humanity. And everything I am today contradicts who Satan tried to set me up and create me to be. And God, by his grace, his continued mercy, and his relentless commitment to work on me, he's just made me a proven source of inspiration and hope to others, not to give up. And listen, can I even say this? Not to just give up on who you feel like you can't be, or let me say it like this, not to give up on becoming this great Christian and you maybe are out there just living a crazy life. But once you are a Christian, and your book speaks to this, there's some things God wants to work in you after Christ. And I think the hardest deliverance for me wasn't coming out of all of that from my youth. It was like, oh, the blood of Jesus, I'm saved, hallelujah. But it was when I still made mistakes as a Christian. Yeah. That was even more painful because I'm like, now I got the tools and I know better. But as God is even through that, okay, yes, you might be preaching and still fight depression. Sarah, I'm going to show you how to help preachers come out of depression. You might be preaching and still dealing with promiscuity. Sarah, I'm going to help you teach other people how to do that. Now, I never really went back into that issue of love as a Christian the way that I did as a teen. But trust me, those corners, like I said, the wall might have been good, but the corners were still there. I still had some of those broken areas God had to work out of me. And all of that is a long answer to the question. It is my identity to become an expert at deliverance and to help people to walk through that with me and use my journey as an example of what God is capable of doing with no shame or fear.
Well, it's amazing because you really know you've been delivered from a thing when God uses you to deliver somebody else from that. And I do think that we are always still in a process. I mean, I think we'll be 60 years old and maybe the Lord delivers me from being smart in the mouth. I don't know. I mean, I mean, it's amazing because as God processes us, we want to be more like Christ.
Right.
And we say that all the time, but we don't know what that really means. And
Right.
so you want to be more like Christ. You don't want to be so quick to like pop off at somebody, or I love and you know you come to love the processing, which I
Yeah.
never thought I would love that. Was it Paul that said, that he basically like glories in his affirmity?
Yeah.
That was
The
Paul, right?
power of Christ may rest upon me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like when you go through that, you're like, Lord, okay, I'm just being broken, because when I come out on the other side of this, what I love about God, there's always a other side of this. That's
Yeah.
what I love about it. Going back kind of to the book and the issue of love, where it kind of found you, um, the enemy was trying to take you out really your whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about the cutting. Was that kind of as a result of like heartbreak or something like that?
Anger, heartbreak. I think that, so I was, I believe, 12 when I think I discovered cutting accidentally. It was like some kids at school, they had some safety pins and they kind of thought it was funny, like, hey, we're gonna write something on our arm, and I did it. And then after I did it, it was something, I don't know if it was demonic or if it was
Yes.
psychological, but something happened in me where it became a go-to. And then I found razors, and I was like, I think one of my friend's fathers, he had them from shaving, and I found this little, thing of razors in the medicine cabinet. And I think one time I was just probably processing some type of pain or rejection, and I was angry. And it was just like I thought it was funny or cool at first, but it became to the point where if I was down, it was like I'll just start doing that. And I was an angry person. I was I mean, when I say person, I don't even know, can I say person? I was an angry kid. I was a very angry kid because, again, I started off, my first memories of life. Of course, I have some beautiful memories, beautiful single mom that did her very best to take care of me through some very traumatizing moments. But some of my first memories are in oxygen tents, being unzipped to take my temperature, falling down the steps because I was over medicated. And I used to think it was a dream that I was flying down the steps. And later I found out I actually did take a headfirst dive down the steps because I was over medicated. I ended up temporarily paralyzed and woke up in the hospital. I had to keep a backpack so that I could go tap my mom if I was having another episode. And I had a backpack to go to the hospital, the lights and so my first memories were wondering if I would live past 6 or 7 years old. I can remember looking in a mirror that was next to my bed, which at one point was on the floor next to my brother's room in the hallway, because we needed to always have somebody nearby to make sure I was breathing. And if I started to choke or cough, and we didn't have a lot of the digital things we have nowadays that might have been useful back then. So I had to always be within earshot in case I started having an episode in the middle of the night. And I remember laying in that bed, looking in that mirror, thinking, I wonder what I would look like in my casket. I didn't know if I was going to live. I was sick so much. And I remember even one time, not a proud moment, I yelled that I hate you to my mother because she was trying to get me to take medicine. And I was so angry. Why am I so sick? I had pneumonia 4 times. I had chronic asthma, food allergies. I think they scratch tested me for 100 things, 80 were positive. My body was just, I don't know. I still to this day don't know exactly what caused it, but I was really sick. And so when you get just a little bit out of that and then you're sexually violated, I wasn't even fully healed from that. And I did deal with like illness throughout my preteens and my teens, but it was tapering. Then I go through that sexual violation. And so, you get to this point where you go through that. Now, here's another thing I don't talk about often, but some people misunderstand my story. I was not raised in what we call the hood, the neighborhood. I was the poor girl in the rich neighborhood. So I ran from that environment to get away from it because I couldn't identify with that community. I didn't understand what it felt like to just go stand in the line and get what you need from the store. I can remember food stamps coming out of my mom's pocket when they were paper, and eating government cheese out of a box and peanut
Government cheese is good though. I'm just saying.
I call it the neon cheese now, that super bright yellow cheese. And
It was good though.
a shame. So it's like, I'm sick. I'm a sexual toy, I'm poor. And I can remember actually being bullied at a very young age by kids on the school bus. And this was a different kind of bullying. It's like, oh, you're poor, look where you live and look what you have, and you don't have nothing. And my daddy's a lawyer, and my mama's a doctor. And so I was bullied at school. And so I became let me see what's the right word for it for media. I became kind of that bad chick, like, okay, well, you know what, then if I'm going to be picked on, let me be tough. So I became tough in my exterior. That's probably when I started to shift into a place of also drinking, smoking marijuana, multiple types of drugs, having sex. And I took on the bad girl persona even while living in the suburbs. And in my older years, I ran right down, like, oh, as soon as I was able and capable, I'm running right down Greenmount Avenue, York Road, running into the streets and hanging out, going to clubs, because I felt like I'm around people in some of those neighborhoods that had my same experiences. And that's really where the Baltimore girl was birthed. But to get to that point of cutting, it was really anger, self-hatred, and just feelings of having no power or control over my life and what I was going through, and feeling like I fit nowhere, even down to not knowing what my ethnicity was and hanging around my Caucasian sisters, will say. I remember fixing my hair and things. And y'all, I worked on that. I got that curling iron, and I got that blow dryer. But my hair, if I get a pool or something, and my hair, the texture of it, they would, why does your hair feel like that? And why, and little things like that. Why are your lips so big? And you're not, what are you? And people were asking me what I was from a young age, and I honestly didn't know. Now I look back and I could see in my family, okay, yeah, I see it in there, but some of my mom and my dad, they look white. But we discovered on both sides, we're Black, Hispanic, Jewish, we have Native American, Middle Eastern. But even hanging around with, in my earlier years, I went to 9 different schools. So I had experiences in all different types of cultures and ways of life. But in this one particular season that I started to act like that self-hatred, that anger, it was like, I'm an anomaly again. I don't fit. I'm poor. I don't look like you. I don't sound like you. I don't fit anywhere, and I don't fit in with anyone. And all these things just continue to grow that self-hatred, negative feelings, which I masked with moving into promiscuity, drugs, alcohol, and cutting, and all those kinds of things.
And it's interesting because when I say the enemy's been trying to take you out your whole life, and I didn't even know all of that about your childhood, but you found yourself in one dangerous relationship after the other. And at one point, there's a particular relationship, I think you might be in your 20s, or I'm thinking somewhere around there. And there's this person that is pursuing you, and you're kind of like, listen, I'm good. Okay. This person ends up finding their way inside your home and everything like that. And you still allow the relationship to progress. What was that you think? Because I think all of us have those moments where it's like, we know we should have gone the opposite direction. What was it inside of you at that point that said, okay, yeah, like, because it's kind of freaky that somebody would find themselves inside your home when they're not supposed to be there, but you still kind of allowed them to be there. So what was going on with you that made you say, okay, I'll let you stick around?
Looking back, even hearing that question, I'm like, Sarah, what was that? But you know what? Being chosen. And when you have been rejected a lot, sometimes even a toxic method of pursuit can give you a sense of satisfaction, because it's that feeling like, man, this person really, really wants me. Maybe I am okay. Maybe I do have value. And even all the abusive relationships that I was in and tolerated, even after my divorce, it was sometimes in that relentless pursuit of someone that may not even have wanted to commit it or treat me right, but they wanted me. It did something. It made me feel okay temporarily, but the cost of that was usually some other kind of toxic behavior abuse on the other side. But we have to be so careful as women that we can discern between being loved and being desired, because I've been desired by a lot of people, but I don't know that I've ever been properly loved. So yeah, I wanted to be wanted, and even toxic want was better than not feeling wanted at all.
You just said something right there, like the difference between being loved and being desired. Stay there with us for just a minute, right? Like, how do we know the difference?
Right. Well, having a relationship with God again, it all goes back to that. When you find a real example of love,
Hmm.
and it's easier to weigh it. I was saying earlier about I have brothers in the Lord and spiritual father figures that I can now kind of have more of an example. What does love look like? And then there's also Jesus, and Jesus' love looked like giving. It looked like sacrifice. It looked like caring more about what he could bring to humanity than what he could take from humanity. And when a person truly loves you, they're going to be looking out for your best interest. And when they desire you, they're going to take at all costs. So a man wanting you, even if it's down to, hey, your body or your looks or your appearance, or I just got to have you, he's coming from a place of wanting to get something from you so that he can be satisfied at your expense. So I've learned with men that want you, and in some cases they can get you, or in my life, there's some that pursued and got what they were trying to get. And then there was this toxic behavior. And then here's the disillusionment, because you're like, wait, I thought you really loved me, but you just desired me. So if you're looking for one of the biggest earmarks of real love, is that person willing to sacrifice to make sure you're good? Or are they only looking out for what they want at your expense?
Yeah, Sarah Grace, I had to kind of unlearn some things too. I talked about the fact that I learned that my body was currency, but I would use it to get things all the time. And there was a point that there was somebody that I was dealing with, another situationship. Like, we were not in a relationship, but I was hoping it would progress that way. And this person actually propositioned me to dance for his friends.
Wow.
And I remember saying to him, would you now, mind you, this person's telling me that they love me, but we're not a thing, right? We're not anything. And I'm like, you would still love me after that? And he was like, I would love you more. This is so ridiculous. Like, when I think about it now, I'm in my 30s at this point. It's ridiculous. But it's amazing. I saw in your book where there was a time where you were studying to become an exotic dancer. I mean, I had considered it before in the past. Like, when those babies get hungry and you don't have money, I considered it at one point. I do thank God, where I'm kind of like, okay, if somebody who knows my parents were to see me there, this would be a thing. That's the only thing that stopped me at that time. Like, I can't even say I had great self-esteem, but I'd always been told I had a great chest. And I was like, we'll put it to use because these babies need to eat. Okay. Right. But you at one point had considered doing that. So would you mind talking to us about that? Can we dive in a little deep?
Yeah, that is a part of my story that I'm not the most proud of, but hey, it's part of my testimony. And the truth is, my whole life, when I was committed to something, I'm going all the way. So I made up in my mind. I think I was 18. I think I was 17 when I started considering it. And by about 18, going into my 19th year, I'm like, I'm preparing. So I was working out. I'm like, I'm not going to be a sloppy exotic dancer. Okay. I'm coming with everything in order. And so I was in a place where I was working out. I was really like preparing. I was practicing. I was going to do this. And the truth is, I had a good job. I was making good money. Even back then, I feel like God had favor and mercy on my life, but it just wasn't enough. I was trying to satisfy something that I couldn't. So I had a 2-bedroom apartment, my own car, still didn't have a GED at that point, had no education, was managing a home improvement company because I knew how to talk. And I had favor, but it wasn't enough. And I was getting attention from men. But at that point, imagine 12 all the way to 18 or 19 with this same toxic cycle. I'm like, look, if I'm going to be prostituted, misused, disrespected, let me at least get paid for it. That was my mindset. Let me at least, this is all they want anyway, to either touch me or see me. So let me dance. It's not that bad. So oddly enough, I was very close with my mother at that time, and I told her. And so my mother was like, well, Sarah, at this point, you've had a couple of stalkers and a couple of abusive relationships. And don't you think it would be counterproductive to put yourself in that environment? You're kind of inviting more of the same. And I thought, yeah, you got a point. But I met my ex-husband that summer when I was very, very, very close to going ahead and making that decision to just walk in whatever club I chose and say, here I am. I'm ready. And he begged me not to do it. He said, don't do it. Don't do it. He was like, let me take care of you. Let me take care of you. And of course, I'm like, I'm not even studying you. I'm not even interested in you. And I got pregnant that summer. And that baby saved my life, changed my life, changed the trajectory of my life. And my ex-husband's open about his testimony, but when I met him, he was a street pharmacist. And he was doing some side hustles and things. And both of us wanted something better out of life, but we didn't really know how. So the one thing that I thank God for his life and mine, us coming together, he shook free from selling drugs. And I chose not to be an exotic dancer. But I felt like, why not? I didn't think I'd ever experience real love or have any real purpose to not do it. But I think God's sovereignty, even back then, he interjected so that was one testimony I don't have, but it is a part of my story.
You've had stalkers?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a whole nother.
That's a whole nother other thing. Praise God for your mom knowing how to talk to you. Because I have a feeling that if she would have been like, what? No way, girl, you would have definitely done it then, you know? So like, what a beautiful relationship that the two of you obviously had where I thank God that you said something.
Yeah.
And that she was like, do we really think this is smart? Yeah. So at least that was there. And then somebody did come along and say, no, please don't do that. I'll take care of you and all of that good stuff. Wow. There was a moment, and I know I'm kind of flipping all over the place when it comes to your life, but these are just moments that I think a lot of us as women, we've gone to that. There was this space where you felt like you'd been used by a lot of people, and you went through this period where you essentially wanted to flip the script.
Oh yeah.
And so you were like, listen, I'm going to be in charge. I'm going to be in control over my body, what I do with it, and all of that stuff. Talk to us about that space and time and whether or not playing the game actually even worked for you.
Dear God in heaven. That's how I got stalkers.
Oh Lord.
I tried to run the game, and the game almost killed me. And I do talk about that a little bit in the book, but a lot of stuff is insinuated and vague. But what happened was, after a certain point, I think I was, I'm getting older now. In my teens, at some point, I was like, okay, all men want is sex. They're not going to love me. And to be honest, the few that might have seemed like they had the capacity and potential to really love me, I usually would push to the side, mistreat, or just do toxic things too. And, sometimes I wonder, Lord, am I single all these years? Because this is like payback for those earlier years. But I made up in my mind, I was not going to be caught off guard by this game anymore. I'm going to run the game. And what I mean by that is I'm going to go into whatever connection, relationship, situationship, knowing this man's not going to love me. All he's going to want is sex or attention or fun or whatever. Because some guys don't even want to see you. They just want time and energy. And so I just kind of got to the place where I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to have fun. And I had some very rugged moments. I have asked someone, let yourself out. Can I have that necklace? Can you call me? No, don't call me. This was a one-time thing. I can even remember being in a place where I was so low that someone had given me a bottle of, I think it was Moet as a gift, and he didn't return my call fast enough. So I took his Moet. I went over someone else's house, and I sat on the edge of the bed of that man after I was finished interacting with him, and called the other guy telling him, I'm drinking your Moet over such and such house, and I'm on my way to yours. Like, that's how low I got, because I wanted to feel in control. I can remember even sitting across the table with one man who I dated, who was one that I loved in my own toxic way. And it was probably him that didn't call me back again the other time. And I looked at him and said, well, when you didn't call me back last night, I went and did this, this, and this, and this. And I'll never forget him leaning over and just kind of putting his hands on and just looking at me like, you better thank God we are in this restaurant in public, because I don't know how he would have reacted, but it was something in me that maybe wanted to hit back. I wanted to hurt back. And so rejection would trigger me really hard to be in a darker place. I can even remember one relationship where the guy cheated and I caught him. And I think I was trying to be faithful to this one. And I said, okay, well, we're breaking up, but we can still sleep together. But I'm going to do what I want to do. And I could be just cold with it. So at one particular point, there was this guy. He was very celebrated, good looking, tall, bald. Everybody said, you'll never pull him. And I was like, watch. And so I somehow made my way to, switch over there to talk to him. And
not switch.
Switch all the way over there with my little, 16-year-old, 17-year-old figure, however old I was at that time. And I got his attention. He was interested. We started going out. And then I started hearing he beats women. He's given women diseases. He's done this and that. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. So we're going to figure out how to ghost this one, because that's a little, we don't want to play that much. So I tried to very passively ghost this one. And he wasn't taking no for an answer. This is back when you had to use the push button phones connected to the wall. He would call my house. Hey, let's go out. No, I'm busy. And after like the second or third rejection, he started threatening me. And he's like, I'm going to take you to a place where you're going to be begging to see your family. And I'm like, yo, you crazy. Like, that's that bull coming out. You crazy. Like, you lying. And so I kept hanging up. Whatever. Stop calling my house. Like, you crazy. Leave me alone. So one night I'm in a parking lot. I'm sitting there. This is in Nashville at this time. And we're at a drive-up payphone. And I'm on the driver's side. A friend of mine's in the car. And I hear her scream, boo. That was my nickname. Boo. And I look over and he stuck his hand in my car, grabbed me by my hair, yanked my head back and looked me in my eye and said, you think I'm playing? He's like, I'm coming for you. And so I called one of my other boyfriends. He followed me home with his 4Runner and his pit bull and his gat and said, I'm going to get you home, boo. I got you. I'm going to protect you. So he helped me get home. I went in. He was on the phone threatening my parents, my mom and my stepfather. And so I had to sit down and have a conversation again with my mother. God bless my mother. And tell her,
I'm just kidding.
I got into something I don't know how to get out of. And I wasn't one to really want to intentionally interact with police, but we went down to the police station because now he's threatening my house. And he told my stepfather, I know where you live. Now my stepfather, big guy, he said, okay, come on over. He was ready to meet him in the parking lot. But we went down to the police station. They did a search on this particular man. I did not have his real name, but they cross-referenced his first name with his street address, and they were able to tell me that he had been giving me an alias and that he was being watched for crimes dealing with missing children and women. His wife and child was missing. He was also being watched for multiple weapons charges, drug trafficking, all this stuff. I had no idea because he came across preppy. And they said, you need to leave right now and you need to go to an aunt's house, go to a friend's house, but you need to take a long vacation immediately because he can go to jail for assaulting you. But when he gets back out, we can't do anything about it because he's not done enough to keep him put away. So you need to leave. And so at 18 years old, when it got to that point, because it kind of was over the course of maybe a year or so that I was on and off, I packed my things. My mother and I drove from Nashville back to Baltimore, where I had moved from years before, moved in with a friend, and I began to struggle with PTSD really strong. Anytime I saw someone that looked like him, I was terrified. Police would come and check on my mom, check on the house, park at the end of the street. And Dr. Hall, I did not know what happened to him for years and years. This is before Facebook and all this kind of stuff. And the Lord called me to move back to Nashville in 2014.
I'm sitting here thinking like, wait a minute, but you moved back like, oh, wow.
So I'm laying in the bed and I'm like, God, you keep sending all these prophets to tell me to move back to Nashville. I don't want to move back to Nashville. I'll never move back to Nashville. And the Lord was speaking to me and I was praying. And I wake up one morning and a sister in the Lord calls me, a prophetess Nora Cavillo from New Mexico, and says, God said you're about to cross over and you need to go where he's telling you to go. And I can remember hearing the Clark sisters song in my head, the safest place in the whole wide world is in the will of God. And I said, okay, Dr. Tamika Hall. I said yes to God by any means necessary. I'll go back. When I moved back a few months after that, I was told that man was locked up that very summer. Finally, he had been prosecuted with enough evidence to put him away for the rest of his life, plus 20 years for murdering someone else that they finally caught him. And so to this day, this man is behind bars. He's incarcerated for a murder that became actually very well promoted in media. And when I tell you the shock and awe of two things, number one, that God kept me through that situation in the first place, or that I was even in it. And number two, that God wouldn't send me back until the streets were clear. And there was another individual I had a similar situation with, not quite exactly the same, who also got locked up that same summer, that I was afraid that maybe if he heard I was back in town. I have a very distinct voice and face. It doesn't matter how many years it's been. You're going to know me when you see me. And both of those people, and I don't wish ill or harm on anyone, right, but I did run with some very dangerous people. Many of the men I dated are either dead or in prison for murder, drugs, and things of that nature. And several have made news headlines. And it was all in the name of just trying to be cute, sassy, desirable boo or China doll. Those were my nicknames. And I almost was killed as a result of it. But by the grace of God, he kept me. And part of that situation is part of what led me to the place where I finally broke and asked God to show me who he was, because I was tired of looking over my shoulder.
Wow. Wow. Well, listen, guys, we've come to the end of part 1. We're going to come back next week for part 2, where we're going to find out how God turned everything around for Sarah Grace. So Sarah Grace, wow, this has been good. I want you to continue to hang out with me so we can continue on with this conversation.
And then when I went through my divorce, Dr. Hall, my divorce was the first real sobriety check I probably had in all those years of how many things I was still not delivered from once the band-aid of a relationship came off my life. And that's where, even though I had operated different for so many years, there were still some things that I didn't even know were in me. So then I had to almost go through a whole brand new renewal process to start dealing with all the things I had brought, but they were masked by marriage. And when I no longer had that, even if it was toxic and we had problems, there was still some things that it kind of kept a plug in. And so he was removed. And then I really had to deal with sober, completely sober, sex-free, man-free pain.